Welcome back. So in this video, I'm going to just kind of do a very brief introduction to HTML, and I'm going to show you how to build a template. And this is the template that you can use every single time that you start an HTML file. If you want to, you could save this and just keep it as a reference so that every single time you want to start a new file, you could always open the template file and then you can go to File, Save As, and then save it into a new one. But I think it's a good idea to type everything up from scratch. In all the videos, I'm going to have us start everything from scratch. So after a while, you'll kind of start memorizing everything. And actually, this is going to be the same thing that I typed up in the last video when I was talking about the different text editors. So we're going to go ahead and open up our text editor. It's still open. And actually we're going to just type the same thing, but I'm going to do this from scratch. So File, New File. I'm going to go to File, Save As, and I'm going to choose week 01. You can save your files how you want. And I'm going to call this one template. Choose the format of HTML. You'll see template.html. Hit save. And there's actually some files on Canvas that I want you to be aware of. Let me go ahead and open this. So some of this you're going to look at yourself. So I've got this video history of the internet, and I want you to watch that on your own. And then I also have this Web 110 Getting Started PowerPoint. Actually, let me just download this real quick. And I don't want to put too much into this video because I want this to get you straight to the point, but at the same time I think it's good to cover a few things to know when you are working and getting started with files. So when you are working with your HTML files, you're going to be opening them up and viewing them in browsers. So it's important for you to know that different browsers are going to show your files differently. I would really recommend that you have at least 2 different browsers that you preview your files in, and this helps give you a bit of information on some of the most common browsers. So I would suggest Firefox is the best overall browser to preview your files in. For mobile websites, Chrome is the best and most used option. That's why it is the best. And then when you are looking at Mac computers, Safari gets used a lot, so it's good to preview your files in Safari so that way you can make sure that you're including everyone. And the picture that I have on the right helps to illustrate the browser's default CSS. Until we actually introduce working with CSS, you're going to be seeing how the browser defaults the styles. There's a lot of styles that are being defined by the browser, and eventually we're going to be able to overwrite them by writing our own styles. But in the meantime, we're going to have these defaults. And this is an older example, but it helps to illustrate that if you were to say, I want the paragraph to be small, small is defined by each browser as looking a little bit different. It still looks pretty similar, but there's going to be small little changes to what exactly that means. And so when you're designing for websites, you have to take into account the fact that everyone's experience is going to be very different. People are looking at things on different devices. They're looking at them in different browsers. They're looking with their windows at completely different sizes. They could have it minimized so it's taking up half their screen. They could be looking at it on a monitor, or they could be looking at it on a laptop like what I have right now. So the next thing to think about is how you are naming your files and how you are sharing them with other people. So this is looking at URI, which is the Uniform Resource Identifier. It identifies a resource by the location or the name. And that encompasses the URL and the URN. The URL is the location. That's what we're used to typing into our browser. Like I've got the example here of jccc.edu. And then we've got the name, which could be something like ISBN and a string of numbers. And what happens is you have that name and it's paired with the location. So that way when you type in the location, it actually brings you to that name. I want to say location, but that might get confusing, that space. And it's the location makes it so it's easier for people to actually type in where that's located at. So the domain name associates a name with a location and it allows you to publish information to a server. For example, your server is going to be the student server space. And so you have that URL location where it's students.jccc.edu/username and then / any sort of subfolder you might have, and then any sort of file that you would have inside of that folder. When you are creating files, it's good for you to look for different standards and to be aware of different organizations that have good recommendations. So an important organization is the World Wide Web Consortium, and they create protocols and standards that everyone follows for creating websites. Without these standards, the code that you write might not be recognizable to a browser and it might not actually show correctly. So you can think of it like if you are speaking a language with someone, you have to agree upon grammar and vocabulary and how to put together your sentences in order to be understood by each other. It's the same thing when you're working with programming. We need to agree upon the syntax and how we are writing things in order for it to be recognizable. So we are going to have different protocols and standards that are created and they're updated. So it's really important for you to know about the W3C and to follow them even well beyond this class. So the W3C is a great resource to make sure that you write your code correctly and you're using the latest standards. A really great website that is kind of a sub-piece to this is w3schools.com, and you can find some really great tutorials there that it helps show you different documentation. A lot of times I will show you different examples that are based off of what the book has, but if I find that the book isn't really providing a lot of really great examples, or I want to elaborate with other examples, I often go to the W3 Schools in order to find other examples to help illustrate things. So it's a really great website to be aware of. This is looking at Section 508 of the Americans Disabilities Act, and it's providing information on the standards and updates that have been made. So this was updated in January 18, 2018. The rule updated and reorganized the Section 508 standards and Section 255 guidelines in response to market trends and innovations in technology. The refresh also harmonized these requirements with other guidelines and standards both in the US and abroad, including standards issued by the European Commission. And with the World Wide Web Consortium, Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, and globally recognized voluntary consensus standards for web content and ICT. And you might see other future updates that will be made. So if you're interested in looking for more information on this, I've got a link here, section508.gov. I've got this on Canvas too, and it helps give you documentation. I would say I think you're in good hands in using this textbook for knowing how to build accessible websites. The textbook covers a lot of really great common standards for how to make your websites accessible and tells you about different resources you can use in order to check the accessibility of your website. And that's also something that I'm going to cover in these videos too. And I'm going to help give you different websites of places that you could go and you could learn more about accessibility. And it's something that also gets covered in future classes too. So this is just telling you about the getting started information. We already looked at this in a previous video, making sure your student server space is working, learning about how to work with FileZilla, which we'll go over later, having a text editor, you should already have that by now, and then how to complete the weekly projects. You should have already looked at that. This is a list of all of the web resources that I have on Canvas. So you can always go through this PowerPoint and look at all of those. So here we are actually getting more to our template idea information. HTML is a programming language, and there's different versions of it. So right now, the version that is most commonly used is HTML5. The previous version of that was XHTML, and we started with HTML, and there's been these different versions over time. And HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language. So when you are first starting a file, you need to specify which version of HTML that you're going to be working with, so that way the browser knows what to expect. So in this picture, you see this exclamation mark doctype HTML. That is letting the browser know we are going to be using HTML5. If we were using XHTML, we would be setting this up differently, where there would be something else. Now, you might expect, how come it just says doctype HTML? How come it doesn't say HTML5? That's just the syntax that it uses. So I would say don't worry about it too much. It'll know exactly what to expect when you have it written this way. And then you'll notice that after you specify which version for it to expect, then we have this other information. We'll go into this template later. So I'm going to close out of this, and we'll actually go ahead and look at our template here. So first thing is we're going to specify which doc type. Now you can type out doc type all lowercase, you can type it out all uppercase. You just need to make sure that it all matches. You can't have the first letter capital D and then everything else lowercase. I like to do all caps so it's a little easier to spot. So this is called a tag, where we have greater than, less than symbols. Sometimes you will put an exclamation mark at the front, and then you'll close that tag. So that is saying we're going to be using HTML5. And then next, this is something that you don't have to do, but it's something that we're always going to do. You're going to put your name and the date. And for me, it's the 5th. Well, it's May 24th, 2022. So for the comment, to start a comment in HTML, again, we have this tag, and then we put exclamation mark, and then we put 2 hyphens, and that's what is the beginning of our comment. And then we have ending with 2 hyphens and then our greater than symbol. You want to be really careful about these hyphens. I've had a student in the past who thought that these were sort of more decorative, and so they just split up their comment by putting in more hyphens. And by doing this, it actually thought that the comment was terminated at the end of the name, and it ignored this date, and it actually put this in the flow of the rest of their website. So make sure that you don't do that. So anything that's in a comment doesn't actually show up in your actual code. It lets you put information behind the scenes where you can leave comments to yourself. So comments are really great. You could have a comment like this to author and give a date. You could leave comments to yourself saying, I use this library or use this code from this other resource, and I'm going to leave a comment to myself so that way I can give credit to them, but then also I know exactly where I got it from. So if you need to do more research, you can look them up again. You might have a comment to yourself that's saying, in this version, I'm testing out how to do this, and this is what is unique about this version compared to a previous version. So you can leave different notes for yourself. And then it's also really great for troubleshooting. Maybe you're having a hard time getting something to show, and so you have one version of a part of your website, and then let's say it's a form. And you've got one form and you've got another form, and you're trying to figure out which version that you want to use. You don't want to completely delete everything. But it's really not functional to have both things at the same time. You could put one of the forms in a comment, and it would remove it from visibly showing up on your website page. It would still be there, so you could add it back in So it's kind of a good way of troubleshooting and then also being used as a communication tool. So that's going to be our comment. And then we're going to put everything into an HTML tag. So when we're talking about HTML, we have elements. And in these elements, they're going to be our different building blocks that we have for our code. So anything that's going to be part of our HTML needs to be in an HTML tag. And we're going to have an opening tag and we're going to have an ending tag. And so we want to make sure that everything that's going in our HTML goes between these. And so we'll end up kind of spacing these out. This is where we're also going to talk about indentation. You can think of these like those like Russian nesting dolls where you have a doll that's inside of another doll that's inside of another one and so forth. And so we've got these containers. And so our HTML is going to have a head element and it's going to have a body element. The head element, you can think of this like writing an essay where you put your name, your professor's name, you put the date that it's due, you put any course information, you put any information that's important to know about, that's kind of behind the scenes sort of context information. You put that all in the head section and it communicates to the browser and it says, by the way, here's this information that you might need to know. It's not actually part of the website, but it's still important for the website. So some examples could be if you have links to a style sheet that has all of your styles, you would put that link in the head section. If you've got any JavaScript scripts or other kind of files you want to link to, you can put that in the head section. If you have any sort of metadata information, we'll get into that later, but anything that you might need for search engine optimization, keywords, descriptions, any sort of thing that you might need to track, that would all go in the head section. And then your browser, your like a search engine, would be able to pick up that meta information. You can also put in, we'll get into this more when I actually introduce CSS properly, but if you've got styles that you're adding to this particular file, you could add styles there, all sorts of stuff, but it's going to be stuff that's not actually visible. But if you think of it like an essay where you have the header kind of information at the top of your essay, it's not your essay, it's the information that's important, and it's the head, it's the top part of it. And then the body is the main content that is actually part of your essay. It's the meat of everything. So in our head section, we're going to put a title. People get a little confused with this because they think, oh, this is the title that would be at the very top of your page. That would give kind of more information. Not really, but it's sort of similar. It's the title that you're giving, but it's the title that shows up on the tab of your window when it's open in a browser. So I'll just put shows up on window tab. So that way you have a little note there. And then we want to add a meta tag. And I'm going to put the character set. So that's what that stands for. CAR set, character set. We're going to set that to UTF-8. I get questions on why it is that we set this. It's kind of a deeper conversation that goes a little bit beyond what the book covers and really the scope of the class. The idea kind of starts from, if you look at your keyboard, you have all of these numbers and symbols and letters. And what happens is when you press on any of those, the computer isn't just thinking of those as what is shown on the keys. It translates that into a number. And so you have these different numbers. So I'd have to look it up. So let's say that you want to press on the letter J. Maybe that is associated with a number like 72 or something. I'd have to look it up. But the computer needs to know when you're typing J that is actually going to be associated with this other number and this value. And it needs to be able to switch back and forth between those. So that's what this idea of a character set is really talking about. It's saying that when you're representing different values, that you're making sure that everyone is on the same page as to which ones that you're using. There shouldn't be a reason why you need to use any other character set. This is the most common one. I'm pretty much always going to just set this character set to UTF-8. But if you want to look into this further on your own, you can. But that's basically what this means. It's saying we want to be on the same page, that when we are putting in these different values and we're typing everything in our code, that it's actually being communicated and understood by the browser the same way. Now, this is kind of an interesting tag because you'll notice it only has one tag. It doesn't have a closing tag. It's just going to have this one. There will be a few more that are like that, but for the most part, things will have opening and closing tags. For now, this is the only thing that we need to have in our head section. And you'll notice that I indented by hitting the tab. I indented title and I indented meta because these are both pieces of the head. And so that's going to be how we organize things. This is one of the things you're going to be graded on in your homework assignments. If you do not tab and indent your code to help make it more legible, you'll get counted points off for that. So this is a good practice to be in, and it just makes scanning through things a lot easier. You'll also notice, depending on your text editor, if you click on these tags, it will often highlight where the end one is. That's a really good way to make sure that you didn't accidentally leave out one of your tags. So I really like working with text editors that do that. You'll also notice while I'm typing that I've got it enabled where it's going to add the end tag for me. I actually don't like that. I prefer typing it out myself. That's the default though, so I wanted to keep it as similar as possible to what you'll be using. But I've even noticed before that a lot of times it'll start adding the quotation marks for me, and I'll accidentally write things multiple times. And it actually will make errors because I'm expecting it to not do it, and I'm adding it myself. So just be kind of careful with that. All right, so the next we have our body section. And this is where we can put our content in. As far as the template goes, I don't want to put too much. So I'm going to just create an H1. H1 stands for heading 1. So if you are used to working with word editor like Word, Microsoft Word, for example, you might be familiar with there being different levels of headings, and heading 1 is the most important heading. It'll be the top heading that you have on your website page, and then any other headings that you would have are going to be lower in the hierarchy of that. And then we might have some content. I'm just going to put the typical hello world. And we could have all sorts of other things. You'll notice this is in the body section, and so it's also getting indented. And so this is going to be kind of our basic template. And then from here, it really just depends on what it is that we're wanting to create. I'm going to go ahead and do Command S, or for you, it could be Control S to save this. And then I want to go and find it. So I've got a template. I'm going to right click, open with, and choose whatever you want. Do Firefox. So this is my website. I've got shows up on window tab, and that's going to show up on your window tab. And then I've got, this is the actual title of your website, which is our H1, which is inside of our body. And then I've got hello world as a paragraph that's inside of it. So this is going to be our basic template that you can use every single time that you're starting. When you start working on the homework, if you're not really sure where to start, I would suggest come back to this video, start with this. That will make sure that you have your comment and that you have all the right information in the head and the body. And then it'll be just a matter of tweaking it so that way it makes sense based off of the rest of the descriptions that you have. One last thing that I want to make sure that I mention before I end this video is white space. white space is for the most part ignored when you are writing your code. So I could put a bunch of spaces in here, and I visually can use this to help organize information. But when you're writing like this, only a single space is going to be recognized. 2 spaces or more is not going to be recognized. So if I were to save this and look at it in the browser, let me just refresh that, you'll notice it doesn't actually look any different. So you can have something have white space in here in the text editor, but it's not actually going to show up in the browser. Same thing, I could add a bunch of spaces to help me organize and keep track of things over here. Save that, refresh. It's not going to actually affect things. Now, I am going to cover in the next video how to actually put white space in your code to help recognize it, but this is just good for you to know about as you're writing things. You want to be really careful too. For example, if you've got something like this where you've got an attribute, that's what this is called again. If you want to specify something about one of your tags, one of your elements, you can add an attribute and then you can set it equal to a value. You do that by having equals and then the value in quotes. You want to make sure that everything is butted up against each other. You don't want to have a bunch of spaces between things. So I would recommend being careful in how you organize things. And we'll go into a lot of that later, but you'll notice I've got comment, indentation, be mindful of your white space because it's not necessarily going to be recognized. If you have any questions, make sure that you leave a comment either in the discussion or you send me an email and I'd be happy to go into further detail on this. But save this at least, and then you'll always have a file that you can go back to and you can reference as you get started every time.